30 years of democracy next year, and then we mark a very, very important milestone election that coincides with 30 years of democracy. Can this democracy sustain for another 30 years? And that was what motivated me to say, what comes next for South Africa? And that's a terrible place to be in as a country, to say you had a president who made bad decisions. Now you have a president who makes no decision. Because Paul Mashatile did not take the deputy presidency position on the basis that he's not going to make it to the presidency. There's a very deliberate pathway for him. He's not going to be a David Mabuza in any way. So on one hand, and the second thing is, there were very simple, easy solutions recommended by the Chief Justice against the exacerbation of state capture that has not been implemented.
Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX, and today I'm extremely excited to welcome a returning guest on this show. She is a journalist extraordinaire, the author of 3 books now, I believe, and we're going to be speaking about the most recent book that she has co-authored. Kanita Hunter, welcome to SMWX.
Thank you very much for having me. It's good to be back.
Yes, yeah. Well, when we first spoke on SMWX, we were both young and naive. It was just after the 2019 election. A lot has happened since then.
The world is a different place.
Indeed.
Definitely.
Indeed.
And 3 books later.
3, well, some of us have only written 1 since then. But yeah, how do you write so many books?
The thing is, you do quality, I do quantity.
If you say so. I agree. I agree with the quality of mine, but I think there's a lot of quality in yours too, may I just say.
Thank you.
Who Will Rule South Africa is the latest book that you have co-authored. Tell us why you think this is an important book.
I think the big conversation in South Africa now, and it has been for quite a while, is what is the future of this country? Where is this country going? In the more affluent spaces, you have the conversation around should we leave, should we go? You know, that conversation.
Yeah.
The conversation in townships is, you know, how bad can it get beyond this? When you have no electricity for 12 hours,
Sure.
When you had all of this hope that had been, you know, sort of put in President Cyril Ramaphosa, and, you know, the ANC was given this sort of final shot in 2019.
Yeah.
What now for South Africa? The fact that you have this accelerated decline and people are feeling it, tasting it, whether it is the cost of living, whether it is the state of the economy, whether it is the rapidly deteriorating public infrastructure, you can feel a country on decline.
Yeah.
And so the question then is, as we celebrate 30 years of democracy next year, and then we mark a very, very important milestone election that coincides with 30 years of democracy, can this democracy sustain for another 30 years? And that was what motivated me to say, what comes next for South Africa? It's an important question because we've learned from the July unrest, we've learned from COVID, we've learned from even President Cyril Ramaphosa's appointment, that politics is intrinsically linked to the future of South Africa. But does politics totally define the future of South Africa? And that's what I set out to do in co-writing this book.
Absolutely. And the book is interesting in that it, in some ways, surveys the last, a long period of South African democratic history, but also very interestingly, the last 5 years and the Ramaphosa administration. When we first met, you had just published your other book, which was kind of a preview and an understanding of how that administration might work. What do you think what is your assessment of the Ramaphosa term?
I think that it failed opportunity. I think that's the first thing. There was a lot of optimism, there was a lot of euphoria around what the possibilities that come along the election of this man.
Sure.
I think that was extremely naive in understanding the complex problems South Africa has, number one. And number two, it is quite a big task to put on anybody's shoulders to believe that one man can fix it all. I do think that that goodwill was a lost opportunity for the president because he could have used it in so many different ways. And I think it was squandered in the early part of his presidency to the point where when a country is on the decline, you then cannot control how quickly it sort of falls off the cliff. And so the idea was that we were going to be kind of sort of pulled back as a country. But in many respects, we have not. And when you take certain metrics and you look at it quite objectively, you understand that things have also gotten worse in the last 15 years. And so this book is not meant to shame the ANC. This is not an ANC bashing exercise. This is understanding South African democracy in 30 years and understanding that this party that has been the majority party for the last 30 years is on the brink of perhaps losing its majority or losing its firm majority. And so what does that mean? The Ramaphosa years, and this is the advantage that this book gives you, is that I sort of try to explain the nuances of what was happening behind the scenes, the incapacity of the state and the president's approach to ignore the incapacity of the state and try to set up parallel structures, for example. And I go into great detail about how that hasn't really worked out in so many areas, whether it's in the state or enterprise field, whether it is in combating gender-based violence or dealing with the ESCOM crisis. So the idea that he came in, or the style that he came in was, I am not going to disrupt the status quo in any way. All I'm going to do is I'm going to try to set up parallel structures and impose it on already failing states, state structures and state institutions and hope for the best. And if we think about it and if we look at the different areas that was implemented in, just if you don't see any success story. You look at the state of Transnet at the moment. If you look at the state of for example, basic education and the fact that kids under the age of 10, 80% of kids under the age of 10 cannot read for meaning. And these are not metrics. These are not entirely legacy of apartheid problems. These are problems that have actually gotten worse over time. Now the idea is to understand that, for me, just sort of dismissing the ANC takes us nowhere. So what we sought to do was to go to the exercise to say the ANC in 1994 promised these things. Where are they with regards to this? We gave them a 40% 40 out of 100 score, which some people may agree with, some people may disagree with. The thing is, Sizwe, what I found quite fascinating, even subsequently to the publishing of this book, is that what the ANC does very, very well is they're able to diagnose their problems really well. And so very few leaders will disagree with the diagnosis presented in this book because they understand that there has been these failures. Local government is in a complete dismal state, and that things have deteriorated at ESCOM, things have deteriorated at Transnet, etc. I mean, there's chapters per failure, if you like. But the point is that to understand where we are, we had to traverse where we've come from, and that's very important.
Absolutely, and I think one of the reasons why this book is worth reading is because maybe no one has followed this presidency as closely as you have. You've worked really hard reporting, but also in your more senior roles now, really following the presidency, and you probably understand it better than at least any of the other outside observers. What do you think characterizes the Ramaphosa presidency, and help us understand whether strengths or weaknesses, what has gone into this presidency from the way that you've been able to see it and understand it?
I think on the positive side that there's good intent. I think that you were not dealing with malicious, nefarious intent, at least apparently. However, the immediate adverse consequence of this presidency is indecision, and And sometimes you have to then weigh bad decisions against indecision. And you have to say, which is the worst devil? And that's a terrible place to be in as a country. To say, you had a president who made bad decisions. Now you have a president who makes no decisions.
Yeah.
And that's the difficulty of it. You also see a president who put party before state, and he would argue that it was successful in the sense that the ANC is more united now. The RET faction, so-called RET faction, is dead in the waters within the ANC,
Sure.
if you like, and that the party has wholeheartedly adopted reform agendas. The reality and the practicality of it is that what Phala Phala did into last year, the allegations against President Cyril Ramaphosa that continue to unravel every single day, despite the reports, protecting him, is that it equalized the playing field. And what that does then is that there's no leader in the ANC that has more of a moral authority than the other, because you have Phala Phala to explain, I have Bosasa to explain, you have Mkhwanazi to explain, another person has Gupta to explain. And so what it does is it equalized the playing field to the point that the president has not been able to hold moral authority. That's the first bit. The second bit is you're dealing with a crisis or with a series of crises that are so far gone that it is almost as if people have stopped hoping for an intervention. The kind of shrugging of the collective shrugging of our shoulders has taken over the nation to say, we don't think this man actually has the answers that we thought he did. And so when there are efforts to explain away the crisis at Eskom and stage 6 load shedding, there's always a sense of distrust. And I think that boils down to the squandering of the good faith that there was, with obviously no merit, right? The good faith was just on the basis that you can't be better than the old guy. That was the premise
Can't
of
be worse.
You can't be worse. And so now there's a sense of being let down. But there's an interesting position that South Africa is at the moment, is that while you see, and the 2021 election results pointed to that, and I think the polls for the upcoming election are showing a similar pattern. While you see a rapid decline in support for the governing ANC, you are not seeing a rise in support, accelerated support for at least the second or the third opposition party that comes after the ANC. And that is so bizarre in many ways. It also points to a nation that is perhaps disillusioned by party politics. And I think that coalitions on a local level, especially in the metros, but all over the country, have exposed to South Africans the notion that one may not be better than the other. You have a DA mayor in Tshwane. It's not great. You have an AIC mayor in Ekurhuleni. Things are dismal. You have an ANC mayor in eThekwini. Things are awful. So that idea that the opposition is a viable option, it almost became a scenario, and I mean, we unpack this in great detail when we deal with coalitions, is that political parties, especially the small ones, almost sought to say, if we can't beat the ANC, we'll join the ANC. And so you're seeing a replica of that, what one may simplistically call bad behavior, even in opposition benches, and even when the opposition are given the chance to govern in municipalities. And I think that that's an interesting a dynamic going into next year's election, the hyper-fragmentation of opposition and the lack of a very serious alternative contender, even with 30 years of ANC failures.
No, absolutely. And I think one of the interesting questions to me as well is, because there's such a tenor of criticism, justified because the country is quarter to falling apart. The question also needs to be raised, what has President Ramaphosa done right? And what has the ANC done right? And I wonder with the hindsight of this book, your work, what you think has gone well in the last 5 years, because of course we're all well aware of what hasn't. For example, one thing I'll certainly concede is there's no real attempt by at least the top of the presidency of like intense state repression. I don't feel like people and journalists are worried about actually being repressed by the Ramaphosa administration. And there was a period where it was actually getting a bit worrying, like, you felt you might be targeted for criticism. And I think Ramaphosa can actually take criticism relatively well. I should know, having been one of his strongest critics. But yeah, what about the other side of the coin? What do you think has gone well?
Yeah. So I said this to someone recently, and I reflected in a column on News 24 when I turned 30, and I said I had gone to an engagement with President Ramaphosa in July, around July, and it was a close-knit group of editors and senior journalists, and we were talking to the president, and the president wanted to hear, criticism from us around, particularly about the debacle of the journalists that went to Poland for the peace visit, or the negotiations that the African heads of state tried to embark on between Russia and Ukraine. And I had said to him, your foreign policy is wishy-washy. So I looked the president in his eye, right? And I mean, that was not the most harshest sort of criticism I've leveled against the president.
Yeah.
I had once said that he has quiet quit, and
that classic column. Yeah.
So I mean, and a colleague who is from another African state was sitting next to me, and he had said to me as we were driving back to Joburg, he says, you guys take for granted the ability to ask your president questions. And I said, well, it's a very rare occasion because he generally doesn't take questions. And he says, the ability for a 30-year-old journalist to say to a head of state, your foreign policy is wishy-washy, and the president taking it.
Yeah.
And there's no fear of reprisal, there's no fear of arrest. And I said, that's not his favor to me. That is the positives of democracy that was very, very, expensive, right? And so the favor, so the conversation around is South Africa a failed state is a silly conversation to have, right? And why I say that is because if we all chip in and we all repeat the chorus that South Africa is a failed state, it will inevitably become a failed state, right? But our institutions are still functioning. Democratic institutions are not at the peril, or not at not in such a perilous situation as it were maybe 5-8 years ago. We had very seriously reached the brink of some sort of mafia state and state capture. And so the fact that the Constitution still triumphs 30 years later, the fact that democracy is still the order of the day, the fact that the judiciary is still independent, mostly, the fact that the media acts free, without fear or favor, is something that could have been off track had we gone down the path that we were already going on in 2015, 2016, 2017. And we don't take that for granted. But because state institutions are surviving, does not mean that they would not be further impacts to further efforts rather to chip against it. And so the fact that democracy survives today does not take away from the fact that there's efforts to subvert this democracy.
Sure.
And me and you sitting here cannot say confidently that 30 years from now, on my 60th birthday, that this democracy is going to be what it is today. And so the idea of saying our democracy is fine is to say that do what you want to with it. And so what this book seeks to challenge is this notion that politicians, the future of South Africa is intrinsically linked only to what the politicians decide to do or not do. And it takes away, and former Deputy Chief Justice Dikgang Motseneke often talks about this, the idea of agency, the idea of being your own liberator, of taking your personal responsibility in the role of now a country, back then when we had to fight for this democracy, and now in 2024, where you have to fight for the sustaining of this democracy. And so when people say 2024 is our 1994, it's an interesting thing. Some people say it's hyperbole because every election is an important election, right? But and the second criticism around that ideology is that the ANC is not an illegitimate government as it was in 1994, where people were voting out an illegitimate government. But that's not it. The notion of 2024 being as important as 1994 is that the country is at the precipice of change, whether you like it or not. There's a new phase of this democracy. And what that looks like, we are yet to determine. And what we try to do with the book is sort of sketch out what that new phase can look like. Yeah. The idea is not to dictate and say, this is what's going to happen, because if we were able to do that, then we were not living in a democracy, and we would be living in, a country that starts with a R, up North Africa, where elections are predictable. And so the idea here is to say we are at the precipice of something, and anybody who denies that is denying the reality.
Let's just hope after this interview we aren't both arrested, by the way, because that could also happen, and that would be awkward.
That would be very awkward.
No, absolutely. And let's get onto that future, because you do start to sketch potential futures and also potential configurations after 2024. We haven't really, I feel like, as a country, appreciated just how new everything could be after this election, and how many unexpected things could happen once the ANC no longer dominates the political landscape. Talk us through some of the unexpected and new things that could be on the other side of this 2024 election.
What I appreciate about this democratic system, the governance system in South Africa, is obviously we have three layers of governance. You have national, provincial, and local government. And I think what was been happening at local government is a good dress rehearsal for what could happen in provincial, or what will happen on provincial level, and what could happen on a national level. And so we now know multiple things. Number one, the ANC will not rule until Jesus returns, because Jesus has returned in some way. And someone made the joke that he probably is en route to KZN and is just having a pit stop at Harrismith, but I will not continue with that joke. But so when you talk about positives, the positive is after 30 years of democracy, there's a liberation movement that is aware of a possibility that they could be voted out. And you're not dealing with a situation where we are worried that if their majority is reduced, that there would be all sorts of manipulations and not just yet, right?
Agreed.
So the fact that we have scenarios where the ANC had been booted out of office and they accepted that in municipalities, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Secondly, we have the different configurations of what can happen based on the municipal scenarios. And for me, it's important to understand of how these things play out, because politics never ever happens just in a vacuum. It always there's always a reference point. And so the one possibility, the ANC just kind of clinches a majority. That's your Mangaung example, what we call a Mangaung example, where the ANC just got one seat extra. Yes, they're governing, but it's not without its turbulence, because rogue councillors, so MPs who disagree with the president could vote with the opposition. So it's still an unfortunate situation.
Just to focus on that, because that's a really interesting point, because typically we think, well, if the ANC gets 50% plus one, well, then, 2024 wasn't this big moment. But
It
actually,
really is.
even if it gets 51, let's say,
Yeah.
that's a different ball game. Like when I was watching the vote on the new public protector,
Yes.
something happened that I'd never seen before, which was they were counting the votes, and you could see in the ANC MPs' faces that they didn't know if they had the votes or not. And I was like, that's what Parliament is supposed to be like. You're not supposed to be able to...
A rubber stamping of the executive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, even if the ANC is at 51, every vote that goes to Parliament could be like that.
Yeah. And it changes the game in terms of, okay, yes, you can comfortably appoint the Parliament, the ANC can elect the president from its members.
Sure.
But what happens when you need to change the constitution? What happens when you need, legislative change? When your MPs just don't show up for a sitting, right? And then majority just doesn't go into your favor. It changes the game, and that level of scrutiny and the breathing down the neck of the ANC. A 50 plus 1, it means a kind of around 7 to 8% loss, percentage point loss, and that is significant.
Oh yeah.
That is, I mean, some people are predicting massive 15-20%, which we've not seen in recent electoral history in South Africa. But that scenario of the ANC just about clinching a majority is a possibility, but at the same time it doesn't come without its pitfalls. Then you have what I call the Rustenburg scenario, where the ANC's majority declines, but it only needs one or two smaller opposition parties to help it. So you give Al-Jamaa a seat, you'll give, someone else a seat.
Next thing, Al-Jamaa becomes the president of the country. Just like...
We've seen crazier things. So that's that scenario where the ANC majority reduces to below 50%, but then can strike deals with one or two smaller political parties to take it above the 50 plus 1 threshold, and things are relatively stable, and patronage networks around rewarding coalition partners with positions, etc., saves them.
Sure.
Right? And I think that, and this is an assertion we make in the book, that some of the deals that they make on local level is kind of an insurance policy for that scenario.
Interesting.
So whether it's your AIC, whether it's your Patricia de Lille's Good, whether it's your Al-Jamaa, for example, these parties are more likely to side with the ANC than they would with the opposition. Then comes the scenario of the ANC losing its majority, the ANC losing its majority by at least, to the lower 40%. In that scenario, it has two options. It can either go with the second largest party, which is the Democratic Alliance, or the EFF would be the third largest party, as the polls predict at the moment. And that's where things get interesting.
Oh, yes. So talk us through the first scenario. We'll get into the second as well. But your book makes some interesting revelations, as it were, about a grand coalition between the ANC and the DA, and how that has actually been contemplated in more depth than we understand.
Absolutely. I think that the ANC, or factions of the ANC, believe that it was inevitable that when it comes to crunch time, that they would have to just work with the EFF, and that would be an easier fit, right? And the EFF is expecting that in terms of how they kind of co-opting ex-ANC, sort of RDT, Zuma supporters into their ranks, etc., right? The problem is the dress rehearsal in Gauteng hasn't been going well between ANC and EFF, because the EFF has a very overtly stated objective, which is not particularly wrong or right, is that we want to eat this crocodile from the inside out, right? And so that's very, very targeted.
Sure.
So the relationship between the ANC and the EFF in Ekurhuleni has been dismal. Joburg has not been too bad, but Ekurhuleni is the sore point.
Right.
West Rand is not great. And there's some issues in eThekwini as well. And so then there's this kind of growing voice to say we cannot side with the ANC on a national level, with the EFF on a national level, if it comes to that, because the demands that the EFF is going to put is going to... Obviously, there's that factional battle that's going to definitely play out. So you have it. So what the ANC does, whether it courts the DA or it courts the ANC, and that's if the DA is amenable to it,
Yeah.
which we understand that they now are overtly against it, but there is a tolerance or a realization that it may come to that. The idea is the stability of South Africa and its future is at risk come 2024. And think about having a situation like a Johannesburg situation in national government where the president goes to Unga in September, and then there's a motion of no confidence, and a few small opposition parties who were siding with the ANC gets, slips a brown envelope or gets convinced of positions, and then there's a motion of no confidence. The current system is so unsustainable. And there's another theme. I mean, we don't explore it in detail in this book, but I think it's going to be part of public conversation going forward, is that there's a level of undemocraticness, I don't know if that's a word, to how the coalitions have been playing out in South Africa.
Sure, yeah.
To the fact that a party with 9,000 votes can become the mayor. That we do not have proper thresholds in terms of who can make it to government or not. And that small opposition parties with a few thousand votes can become deal makers in what becomes. And so it's not the votes of the majority say that makes it. It really then becomes, the who pays the highest price,
Sure.
for these votes. And that's very scary. The secondly is like the coalition frameworks and legislation or has to be amended. There has to be some conversation around motions of no confidence.
Sure.
How can you just unseat a president constantly?
Yeah,
and what
yeah.
does that do for the stability of the state, and what does that do for the integrity of the republic?
Look, that happening in Joburg is tough to take, but we can just about soldier on. If that starts happening at the national level every 2 weeks, we could be in for a very bumpy 5 years.
Absolutely. And then what happens to the fact to now the new introduction of independent candidates in the National Assembly, where we're now going to have 3 ballots, which I don't think people have realized. Obviously, we're waiting for the Constitutional Court to rule on the matter, but you're effectively going to have 3 ballots. You're going to vote for in the province, you're going to vote national to national, and then province to national. And so independent candidates and the role that they play in forming allegiances and voting, with either the opposition or with the ANC, it creates a room of instability. Now, I always say that we're not assessing coalitions and what it can bring through the lens of what's good and what's bad. It is what it is. The question is what we do with this, what we do in preparation of an eventuality, if not this elections, next elections, but and how do we prepare for what's to come? Things around the fact that coalition agreements are secret, that we don't know we don't know what is at the center of the agreement between the AIC, the EFF, and the ANC in Ekurhuleni. Now imagine that playing out at a national level. Imagine every single cabinet meeting being a pre-cabinet meeting. There has to be a negotiation about which bills get passed by cabinet or not. Just think about what it means just in terms of service delivery and in terms of the state actually, the wheels of the state actually turning. And we see a really, really good example of the consequences of political uncertainty on the civil service, as we see in Johannesburg, as we see in other metros. That when things are dysfunctional politically, it just inevitably translates into a failure of the bureaucracy. And then when the bureaucracy fails, that's when you are without electricity for 5 days and when I don't have drainage for 2 months.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess on that note, again, to come back to your knowledge of the Ramaphosa presidency, there's a really interesting opening to the book as well, where you go into that moment where he was on the verge of resignation and talk us through how he was walked back from that. How do you think he survives in each of those different scenarios? And do you think he remains president or intends to remain president in each of those scenarios?
I think that whatever the election outcomes plays into the hands of ANC factionalism and what succession looks like in the ANC going into 2027, is it?
Yeah.
And so we are yet to see the full extent of that, because what the ANC does really well is that when it comes to an election, when it comes to crunch time, they're able to rally together very, very well. But will there be, whatever the outcome is, will be used in his favor or in his or against him. And so the idea, when you around the 2022 ANC internal election was that we need a figurehead to carry us across the finish line in the next election, and the only person to do it is Cyril Ramaphosa.
And by the way, very interesting sections in the book about how that all happened, and
yes, the
viewers and listeners should also read it to understand what was going on behind the scenes in these key moments.
Also, the thing is that what we've come to realize is that a lot of the support for Ramaphosa, or the people that carried him across the finish line in 2022, Nasrec 2.0, were people who may not be his avid supporters, and people who actually may be against him on many levels, but understood the need for him in that moment.
Yeah.
And that's why that desperation to talk him off the ledge of resignation with the Phala situation was that if he goes, that opens the way for someone like a Paul Mashatile. You'd see on the cover of the book, we have people like John Steenhuisen, Ramaphosa, Julius Malema, Herman Mishra, but we also have Paul Mashatile.
Yeah.
Because Paul Mashatile is an important player. He does not hide his ambition for the highest office. I think since he came into office, he's probably the busiest deputy president this country has ever had, in the sense of, attending events and doing things and trying to be visible. Because Paul Mashatile did not take the deputy presidency position on the basis that he's not going to make it to the presidency. There's a very deliberate pathway for him. He's not going to be a David Mabuza in any way. And so the idea is, how urgent will that ambition and that hunger for the highest office be with him, and what does that play out in terms of the internal cracks within the ANC going forward? And so a lot of, that's why I say, a lot of what happens, the outcome of the election plays into that fracture, especially then when if the ANC loses its majority on a national level, how that plays out into the ANC factionalism. What we understand about Ramaphosa is his thirst and need to protect his legacy and to protect his image as this Mandela-esque kind of unifier leader. And so there's always an effort to almost not, wrestle in the mud. But at the same time, when you see what has happened subsequent to that in terms of Phala, you also see political tactician at play. So there's a bit of kind of, on one hand, that level of larger than life. I'm bigger than than petty politics. But at the same time, you're seeing ferocious efforts to play politics in what we've seen play out around just, if you just isolate Phala.
Yeah.
So what happens to Ramaphosa? I think that he has shown that he does not have the appetite to want this very much, and I think that has been his strength, especially in the last year, where I don't need to be here. So if you that looming threat of we're going to get rid of him loses its sharpness because, well, the man doesn't want to be there. But on the other hand, it has consequences for the country because you need a president who wants to do his job. And so the idea then of, and I mean, to be fair to him, it has almost neutralized his internal political opponents. Therefore, you see movement around privatization, where in the past you probably would have seen a lot more contestation. Or you see movement around public sector working with government in terms of energy reform. And you see movement in the criminal justice system that you haven't seen before. So I'm saying we're being fair to the man, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But at the same time, you also see political opportunists sit back and wait for you to hang yourself enough.
Yeah,
And then see and be ready to seize the moment when the moment arises. And that moment's never going to be before an election. It'll always be after an election.
Well, what's fascinating about that is that we've never had a president who was prepared to walk away from the presidency as much as Ramaphosa. So he's not going to do anything to stay there.
Which is a good and bad thing.
Exactly. But ironically, the time that the ANC might need Ramaphosa the most is if they fall below 50, because Ramaphosa can't do a lot of things, clearly, but one thing he can do is cut a deal. Cut a deal which usually leaves him at the top of that deal. So he can cut a deal for power, and he can talk across the aisle quite well. And so he would be the perfect person to try and bring together a coalition with the ANC at the head. And it might be ironically at that time that he's no longer actually there.
I mean, I observed him very closely during the BRICS deliberations earlier this year. And you see him, and I mean, we talk about this in the book, around COVID and the president that he was on an international scale. It's almost like a tale of two presidents, right? When it comes to deal making, when it comes to negotiations, when it comes to consensus building, we cannot underplay Ramaphosa's prowess in bringing people together.
Even holding the ANC together.
And holding the ANC together. That's why I say, I mean, if ever there was a situation where somebody got the wrong job, you see it on these displays especially on the international stage, where you say you shouldn't be president, you should be UN Secretary General. You should be the head of the AU. You should be that kind of where that consensus building is enough. But when you run a country, unfortunately, as much as they are positive green shoots, and they are, it's that urgency that's necessary, the ruthlessness that's necessary, the ability to make hard decisions supersedes any other positive intent. And so the idea then to say, this deal breaking, this negotiations, the skills, how much of it deals with the urgency of the problems that we're facing? And when you look at the crisis around the economy, when you look at the crisis around state-owned enterprises, when you look at the crime situation, you understand that you're dealing with a situation where the deal making and the consensus building, etc., is not yielding results fast enough, and therefore the problem is actually getting accelerated, and it's getting worse. And so that's the tricky balancing act.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot in this book. One of the interesting parts, you break the book into 3 different parts, but you've got a part where you kind of survey different promises around the economy, Eskom, state-owned enterprises. I want to come to one, which is about the criminal justice system and the NPA. Because Ramaphosa and a lot of what the ANC is trying to do in this term is say, we know we got things wrong, but we are going to right the ship, and we will deal decisively with questions of corruption. And of course, that ultimately comes down to whether the NPA actually prosecutes people. We've seen some recent developments subsequent to the publication of this book with Machela Koko, for example, that case being struck off the roll, the Nulane case, of course, also, I think you do mention that, going sour. Hermione Cronje came in with a lot of energy. She left. Do you think the NPA and that fight has been won or lost, or is it somewhere in between?
I think that, I try to be quite level-headed around the understanding of that space, right? You can't assess what's happening today without going back to where we were. Where were we? We were at a state where the head of state basically repurposed the entire system of the criminal justice system for his own benefit and for that of his lieutenants. Is that the case today? No. So score, right? Do we have an overt subversion of the law by those who are meant to protect and upkeep the law, not what we saw back then? Is there an effort to reform? Absolutely, we see it. Is the reform happening at a pace that is needed? No. Are things happening? Yes. But I make the argument that the pace of reform is too slow for the pace against the pace of those holding on to the dysfunction and or those who benefited from the rot within. And so the institution, so if we take a tree, for example, it's so this side of the bark is rotting as quickly as this side of the tree is growing. And so you have to constantly counterbalance this negative element of the criminal justice system, whether it's the NPA or the Hawks or the crime intelligence, against this positive green shoots, which are there.
Yeah.
And I mean, Bheki Cele spoke to the South African National Editors Forum Council meeting over the weekend, and he says, as much as there are state capture offenders are going to be in orange overalls, and the fact that you don't really can you count anybody that's
I can't, and actually it's got to the point where even the Chief Justice I interviewed him, and I actually think people missed a lot of what he said in that interview, because he said to me, he was like, I can't believe basically how little has been done in terms of people who are in cabinet who I said were involved in wrongdoing, who are just still there. So
on one hand, and the second thing is they were very simple, easy solutions recommended by the Chief Justice against the exacerbation of state capture that has not been implemented. If you look at just the State Security Agency, the fact that an recommendation to amend the law is being used to actually pervert that space even further. And you see it in different iterations across the state.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the idea then...
Same with the NPA. We're waiting for laws to be passed to actually do stuff.
So now you have this ID that, but it's never... It's not empowered in the way that it needs to be empowered. And so when you have a decision like you had this week with Machela Koko, the case being struck off the roll, an ordinary person in the public doesn't understand the technicalities of the law. They don't understand that if a case is struck off the roll, doesn't mean a person is innocent, because there's reams and reams and reams of evidence before the Zondo Commission, before so many different tribunals around this particular case. The issue is, it's just another example of the dysfunction of the NPA. And so one has to then question to say, who then takes responsibility, and at what point can we stop blaming the state capture years? Similarly, the case with state-owned enterprises and Transnet and Eskom. At what point do you say that you have to say you no longer can blame Brian Molefe or Machela Koko? At what point is it to say that, yes, the rot in that era is widely documented and accepted in many quarters, but then, so does that absolve the leadership of Andre de Ruyter and subsequent to him from any positive upshoots that's meant to have occurred, or any changes that have meant to occur since then? So the same thing applies in the criminal justice system. So yes, while we applaud the fact that maybe you don't have people who are found to be willful lieutenants of a sitting head of state in key positions as deputy directors of public prosecution. At the same time, inefficiency can be tantamount to corruption. So that's the heartbreaking situation of where we are as a country. You have to choose your poison. You know, corruption or inefficiency. Those are the options that we have, and that's really, really sad.
So let's come to the writing of this book, your third. What was different about the writing of this book?
I think that so writing this book sent me into a state of despair personally. It also so one of the, if you ask people who know me, one of my main characteristics is I'm hugely optimistic as a person and hugely optimistic as a journalist. And the idea of always giving people and situations the benefit of the doubt. And I think that writing this book was important for me in trying to find the silver lining and trying to find those green shoots and trying to understand that if we as a society, South African society, believe that this country is going down the drain, we are fast tracking that process of the country going down the drain. You forget a lot of what happens over the years.
Yeah.
And so sitting down and forensically detailing what has happened in different areas, whether it's criminal justice system, whether it was with the state-owned enterprise, whether it's with the state itself, you understand what a rough ride South Africa had been in. And it almost exhausts you in some ways. But writing this book for me was to say, all right, so everything's bad. What's good? What's going to sustain us for another 30 years? And then obviously co-writing a book is interesting because you then come with different perspectives,
sure.
and you come with different worldviews. And obviously we don't kind of write the book at the same time. You write the chapters that you are more stronger at and topics that you are more comfortable with. And my co-writer Adrian Besson wrote, especially the earlier chapters where he had obviously a firmer grip on.
Yeah.
But this book is not to just regurgitate headlines. This is to go deep into understanding why that simple question that Tani in El Dorado Park is asking, why is the DA not growing? So understanding why is the DA where it is? What are the EFF's growth prospects? And you can disagree with that, but we're trying to give you all the relevant information and the scenarios and analysis layered on top of each other so that you're able to understand things that, perhaps confuse you or perhaps, are of interest to you. What happens to smaller opposition parties? What are their prospects? Understanding things around the Electoral Reform and the Electoral Amendment Act, and what does that mean? So taking political theory or political abstract and trying to translate it to an ordinary South African. And I think what this book does, which perhaps my first book, Balance of Power, didn't do really well, was write for the ordinary South African, not write for the politically enlightened or the political elite or the people who are interested or just those, at the, the upper percentage of society, that's the chattering class. This book is meant to say, okay, we all freaked out about what is the future of the country. What are the options? What is possible? Where do we come from? And where are we going?
Well, Carnita Hunter, thank you so much for joining us on SMWX. Thank you very much for writing this book. Certainly an important contribution to South Africa's public discourse and one to read, especially in the build-up to the election. As you know, on this channel, we are really trying to get our head around the 2024 election. And this book is a really important resource for understanding what is built up to this election, what could happen during the election and after. So shout out to you for writing the book and thank you for joining us on SMWX again.
Thank you very much. And I hope to be back before elections.
Oh, yeah. Before, after, during. Spread the fire and like, share, subscribe, and comment down below. Aye. Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX, and I am extremely excited to be joined by political analyst, author Rebone Tau. Rebone, thanks so much for joining us on SMWX.
Hi, Sizwe. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been a long time in the making. I'm always really appreciative of your analysis because you have spent time within the ANC, so you just understand the party better than we analysts who try to analyze from the outside. And we're really going to do a deep dive into the build-up to the December conference. And I don't think there's anyone better to do it with. So once again, thanks for being here. And let's start at the beginning. Let's start at the top. To what extent do you think President Cyril Ramaphosa, as we speak, is in the driver's seat for the party leadership going into December?
One thing about this conference going to December is a very interesting conference. And why I say that, you come with a National Executive Committee where the Secretary General of the party is suspended. And the Deputy Secretary General, who is late, may his soul rest in peace, Jesse Duarte.
Indeed.
So you've got an organization that does not have a secretariat, you know, and you've got the acting Secretary General in the form of the Secretary General, Paul Mashatile, you know. So things are not normal in the ANC, like we know historically, you know, where sometimes you look at the Secretary General of the ANC, where they are politically, then you know that if the Secretary General is not with the president is not likely to win this conference.
Sure.
We have seen it, and I can take you back to 2007 in Polokwane, you know, when Malema was the Secretary General, you know, when he was not moving with the former President Thabo, you know, for the position of, when he was contesting the third term, he decided to move with the former President Jacob Zuma. You go again back to 2012 when they were united, Gwede Mantashe and Zuma, they won that conference, you know. And then now you go to 2017 when you see Gwede Mantashe not supporting the candidate that was supported by Jacob Zuma, which in the form of Dr. Dlamini Zuma. That then shows that Mantashe then takes his numbers or the support, because the SG is very central in the administration of this process is going to December. So with Ramaphosa right now, some might say, yes, he's getting these pronouncements from provinces.
Sure.
But that might not be a true reflection, because some people might be scared of being whether arrested. Some people might also be scared of their branches failing audit. So there's a lot of things that is at play. So we might not be seeing a true reflection. You know, a true reflection we might see maybe in December at conference, because this has been a very difficult era for Ramaphosa as the president since his election in 2017. The organization keeps speaking about renewal, the unity, and we're not feeling it or seeing it, this renewal that he has been speaking about as the president, as the political head of the ANC. So he might come back if there's he might not come back if there's a strong candidate. For now, we're not seeing any strong candidate also from the different people who are saying they're contesting for president. For example, Dr. Dlamini Zuma, Dr. Mkhize, by the way, they both come from the same province, KwaZulu-Natal. I'm hearing that Didi Mabuza seems to also want to contest this thing for president of the ANC. And we know that even his province, yes, did not pronounce him, they pronounced Lamola. But Didi also is someone who is grounded, you know, in terms of the politics of his province. But that campaign of Didi Mabuza might also be late, because he was very central also in 2017.
Sure, of course.
When he swayed the votes towards President Ramaphosa and dropping the NTZ faction just hours before the voting.
So, I mean, what you said, there's so much already to unpack, because firstly, I want to come to this question of the lack of an SG, which marks this conference out as unique. And then to think of a figure like Mashatile, because Mashatile is effectively SG, he's effectively treasurer, he's effectively DSG. And so he seems to be at a crucial part of the actual machinery of the party. To what extent do you think that will be an advantage for him going into the conference? And how would you analyze Paul Mashatile's position right now?
he sits in a very strategic position. And if you read reports coming from the last NEC meeting, that there were some in that NEC that wanted Mashatile to be removed. And their argument was that no, Mashatile can present 2 reports, which is the Secretary General's report, which we all know of, the organizational report, and the Treasurer's report. But that did not fly. And as it's alleged, in the media, that the people who were actually pushing for this, interesting enough, are people who are contesting the same position as him. The media was writing there in the papers, Oscar Mabuyane, Kensani Kubai, and Ronald Lamola. And they're all contesting the same position as him as DP. So that means that they're feeling the pressure that it is going to be difficult for them having Paul Mashatile at the center of the issues of the organization, and him contesting for that position of deputy president. But then that debate did not find expression or support within the National Executive Committee. That's why Paul Mashatile remains in that seat. Whether it was strategic for President Ramaphosa is another thing, probably he because the thing is that when you speak about the CR22 or the CR17, we put Kensani outside, because she was in the NDZ faction in 2017. But Lamola and Oscar were in support of Ramaphosa, and they're contesting each other for the same position, using the generational mix ticket, that shows you that there's serious problems in that faction.
There are, and I think one other thing that comes to mind when you already give your analysis now is that Ramaphosa seems to be the clear candidate so far for the presidency, or at least the most public one. But everything underneath that is in some ways up for grabs. And so what we might see is an attempt to say, okay, well, Ramaphosa is useful for elections. The media likes him. So maybe it's useful for us to keep him at the top as a figurehead almost, but everything downwards shifts towards a different center of power. What do you think of that theory?
I mean, if you look at the current nominations, yes, it's not nominations of branches, but also pronouncement, let's say, of the different provinces, I think we are still waiting to get a sense with the KwaZulu-Natal where they stand. But as things stand, Paul Mashatile yesterday was pronounced by his home province, which is Gauteng, for the position of deputy president. We know that Limpopo a few days ago also pronounced him, while Limpopo says we also want a national chair in the form of Stan Mathabate. Gauteng has also done the same and said we also support Stan Mathabate because obviously now that means the relations between these two provinces have been strengthened. And then when you engage in the Northwest, they've just come from the provincial conference. And when you engage, you are told that no, the other core, which is close to Paul Mashatile, it is the core that has won the conference, the one that led by Nono, who is now the provincial chair. And then the other core that lost, Bushi, who was the premier, those were seen to be aligned to the president. So you have now Paul Mashatile finding a lot of support from the Northwest, from Gauteng, and from the Limpopo. So that means that Lamola, who's been pronounced by his province, is going to find it very difficult. We've seen a delegation of the leadership from Mpumalanga going to KwaZulu-Natal to engage with the leadership of KwaZulu-Natal, but nothing has materialized, because as I said, that KwaZulu-Natal were not sure if they will even pronounce. We're seeing that they've gone to Limpopo, the leadership of Mpumalanga. Obviously, they're carrying the name of Lamola, but I don't know, going to Limpopo, is it too late? I don't know, because Limpopo has pronounced the leadership on its preferred candidate, which is Paul Mashatile, for the position of deputy president. And then there's another thing that is also coming up, the what you call the Cape Town provinces, the Cape provinces, which is Northern Cape, Eastern Cape and Western Cape that are also in conversation. But if you put the numbers of those 3 provinces come together, someone was doing a calculation and they were saying it's around 1.2. I've not done the numbers myself, but they're saying it's 1.2. And if you put Limpopo and Gauteng, it's around 1.1. And already you have not put Northwest, which is also supporting Paul Mashatile. So right now, Paul Mashatile is seen to be a frontliner. But then you have now Senzo Mchunu now also having interest for this thing of deputy president. That means KwaZulu-Natal now has got 3 candidates in the presidency, which is in the form of 2 presidents and a deputy president. Then you go to the issue of the Secretary General. There's the name of Gwen Ramaphosa that has been also coming up. There's the name of Mtumiseni Ntuli from KwaZulu-Natal, who we know that just recently lost to what is known as the Taliban faction in the KwaZulu-Natal province. But he was elected as the PEC member. So then you have the DSG, people like Nomvula Mkhwanazi, who has, by the way, been pronounced by her home province, Gauteng, for the position of the DSG. Another name coming up is Phoebe Potgieter. So that means this race for DSG might be between Phoebe Potgieter and Nomvula, if Phoebe also gets nominated, because so far people were also looking at the provinces, how they are pronouncing themselves. Will there be a province that will pronounce Phoebe Potgieter? I don't know. Or will she just be nominated by branches where she will reach threshold? And then you've got the TG's position, which is very interesting. I think from a Gauteng point of view, you've got Mzwandile Masina running for that position. You've got Pule Mabe, who are these 2 are seen to be very close allies in the politics of the ANC, but they seem to be contesting each other. And unfortunately, yesterday, when you read the Gauteng statement, did not endorse any of the 2 candidates for the position of TG. The question that between Pule and Mzwandile, who has got the muscle to run their campaign at this 11th hour. Then you've got Ino Godongwana also, who is also contesting for this position. Then also there's Kumbuzo from Limpopo, who's also contesting for this position, and her province also did not pronounce her, but we were seeing that there is now also for candidates. So there's a lot of candidates. So there's a pool of candidates, but the question is that who will find support within the structures of the ANC? Because when you look at this pronouncement, you can't look at them in a way where you say, yes, branches, it's a conference of branches. Those pronouncements, they've got a way of influencing the nomination processes by branches.
And I think what's interesting about this conference as opposed to other conferences is just because a leadership structure in a province pronounces on one candidate doesn't necessarily mean that a province is united behind that candidate. So we can't always assume that because a province has pronounced, that definitely means that all the delegates from that province will ultimately vote in that way. So in some ways, it's one of the more uncertain conferences that we've had. We can't simply say, well, we know exactly which way each province is going.
No, you're 100% right. I mean, when you look at the provinces, you need to look at the margins of the other grouping, how much they had when they won the conference, and the other grouping that lost, how many numbers do they have? Because there's 2 things. The ones that lost, it's in their best interest to retain the delegates that they had. The one that won, it's also in their best interest to persuade some of the branches or the people that they know are strategic to come and join their corps. So you might have leverage as having won a conference, but you might also lose soldiers along the way. So you need to retain those soldiers that you have, and then you can still go and take. And the other grouping can lose or can retain also. You know, so we have seen there is no provincial conference that the ANC went to and it was not contested. All of them were highly contested. The margins, if you look at them, You find the others won by 300, 200, you know, the margin, 100 and something. So those will really be a factor. I fully agree with you going to this conferences. But, you know, there's one thing that in politics there's no loyalty sometimes. Especially when you look at the economy of this country. Some people need money to survive. And it's easy. And the ANC itself has admitted to this thing of money circulating. And that's why when you look at the Ramaphosa issue with the public protector, even the CR17 files that have been sealed by the courts, you know, that they can't access those accounts, you know, it's because of the money. And not only Ramaphosa that uses money, everyone in the ANC, you can't run for any position if you don't have money. It becomes very difficult. So that will also play a huge factor on going to December.
Let's come to the question of the presidency then, because although we've said that Ramaphosa is, you know, the most public candidate, there have been developments there. We know, for example, firstly that former health minister, also former national official in the ANC, Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh, has really started coming out swinging now. But then suddenly, and to our surprise, the rebirth of the NDZ campaign. Now, help us understand this, because it seems quite confusing that from the same province you now have two different candidates when clearly you need an obvious challenger to Ramaphosa. What's going on with this presidency battle?
I mean, if you read reports, you'll know that there was a delegation. Some who are also in the National Executive Committee who are aligned to the former President Jacob Zuma. Went to go and see him. I think it was last week Sunday, if I'm not wrong. But what is very interesting, and I want to take you back to the provincial conference of the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal. Before that conference, you also had regions going to see the old man in Gandla. The old man seems to be playing a very strategic role in that province. And as things stand, some will tell you that the old man is not comfortable with Dr. Mkhize being the candidate of the province. He's more comfortable with Nkosazana Dlamini running again for December, which makes it very difficult, because within the RT, when you speak to some of the RT members of the ANC, they will tell you that they don't think that Nkosazana is the right candidate right now to contest this conference, because they feel that she has run her race in 2017 and now they need to come with a new face. So this actually makes former President Jacob Zuma in a very difficult position, because his candidate seems to be rejected by those who are supposed to go and work the machinery on the ground. You know, because as you can give instruction, but the people who work these machineries on the ground, you know, making sure that they interact with branches on a day-to-day basis. They visit even delegates. The delegates will be the most important people once these BGMs are finished, you know. So that really puts him in a very difficult. But that has also split the numbers. And with this one, it goes back to what we spoke about, the issue of the numbers, because if you look at KwaZulu-Natal is allocated, I think, if I'm not wrong, 800 delegates. With those 800 delegates, there is a portion for Ramaphosa there.
Yeah.
That means that the portion that was supposed to maybe, for example, go to Zweli Mkhize alone is now divided. It has to now, some will have to go to Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. And that's why one is wondering if KwaZulu-Natal will pronounce itself. And why I want to elaborate on this. We know of the political violence in that province. We know of the Malema Commission, you know, and nothing has come out, you know, in terms of the political killings. Even just yesterday, I was seeing on social media that one of the councillors was gunned down last night. So even this process might be very messy, because people will feel betrayed. People will feel sold out, and the only thing, the language they understand is the gun. And the ANC has failed to really zoom into KwaZulu-Natal on this thing of political killings in that province. So we might see people trading very carefully, because in politics, as I say, there is no loyalty. People can come here and make a promise because they want to achieve a certain thing, and then when they get to the other person, they make another promise because they want to achieve something else. Then you find that they've actually made commitments to about 5 people. Now, when they have to deliver, they are not able to deliver.
That's quite interesting, and I think it also goes more broadly to the wider presidential race, because one of the murmurings you hear is that, in fact, there may be a surprise. We don't see an obvious contender and someone contesting Ramaphosa, but people are themselves scared. They know the media likes Ramaphosa. If they put their neck out, they'll be undermined publicly before the conference can happen. So there's this idea that maybe from the floor even, or very late in the day, we might see the proper alternative to Ramaphosa emerging. And that's why we haven't seen the real alternative yet.
No, absolutely. I mean, even if you look at these pronouncements, there's a guy who I say, this guy is very central in the ANC politics. Gwede Mantashe. We can go back as far as 2007 when he emerged as a Secretary General. In 2012, the same thing. In 2017, he dropped Zuma for Ramaphosa. And if you see now, his membership is in Gauteng, by the way. He might be linked to the Eastern Cape because obviously that's his home province where he lived. But his membership is in Ekurhuleni when you speak to some within the ANC. So that means himself, his home province, has not pronounced him.
Yeah.
So he's pronounced by Eastern Cape by the virtue that he's got a home in the village in the Eastern Cape, So this then makes it very interesting. Because if you speak to delegates who were at the policy conference, and this policy conference, which I'll come back to also as we engage further, they will tell you that the issue of Phala Phala was some tried to raise it from the floor.
Right.
But Gwede, being the national chair, managed to, sometimes he can be very reckless how he responds.
I saw Supra trying to raise things and he was just like, no.
Very dismissive, and so he dismissed this Phala Phala thing, Some wanted to use the issue of the National General Council not being held by this National Executive Committee, that there needs to be a review of our policies before we can go into the policy conference. Even there, he dismissed it, So he plays a very crucial role, and he's going to play a crucial role in December. So right now, these are people that when you look at people like Zweli Mkhize, who is seen not to be liked by the former president Jacob Zuma, he's seen not to be finding expression in the Cyril Ramaphosa faction. So these are people that might find themselves not finding a home in the two weather factions.
Yes.
They might have to create a third way, which might come from the floor. And when people now are putting numbers together and saying, okay, we're able to reach threshold, and with reaching threshold, we can pursue some people, because sometimes delegates can be with you, but when they go to the ballot, it's a different thing again.
So we could have an Mkhize, Mantashe potential way where they then maybe convince some of the other people who have been overlooked in the different factions to come together. Yeah,
that might happen, because that will be because material conditions might dictate at the time, and this is the language that even in the ANC they use, that material conditions sometimes dictate, and when they dictate, you have to change your strategy. And that's why they've got this document called Strategy and Tactics, So if Mantashe really wants this thing of national chair to return, he might also say, okay, you guys are rejecting me. I'm going to go and engage with others who I think we can find each other. You have the issue of FDT Mabuza that I spoke about earlier on, that his campaign might be late, but he might also be commanding some support in the Mpumalanga province. But it's the issue that at this present moment they seem not to be talking to each other, the other groupings, because they still have hope. And I think it's just that the ANC is also late with its own processes, because next month already there were supposed to be PGCs, and those PGCs then will tell us, because if you read the rules of this conference, you need 3 people for each position.
Right.
Who will automatically go to the ballot in terms of the nomination, the numbers. So, and then for additional members, 200 people who got the most nominations will automatically go to the ballot. I even laugh at times and say, I wonder if NEC members of the ANC themselves read these rules, because these rules might come back and hit them, because some of them are not popular. They will not be able to get those numbers, you know. ANC is not a normal organization. There are people also who felt they've been removed unfairly as members of parliament in the past, or MPLs or councillors. Some might want to settle scores, you know. So when you deal with an ANC, you must bear all these issues that the organization faces itself. When you speak about people who, 200 people who will go to the ballot automatically with the most nominations, I'm not sure if they will be able to do that. Most of those NEC members get those nominations, you know, or in the different provinces, because there is a new phenomenon. That's why you are seeing a moria of candidates in the officials of the ANC. So ask yourself about additional members. That means the stakes are high. And the biggest problem is because some use this as a leverage to be members of parliament, to become ministers in 2024.
Sure.
So for them, it's do or die right now. They need to find an expression in the National Executive Committee. And the ANC needs to have this conversation. Do they need a National Executive Committee that is going to be a burden to the ANC, or a National Executive Committee that will carry the ANC? Because the ANC is going through a very difficult time, even financially. So you need people who are financially stable, people who will not want to be deployed in parliament as members of parliament, people who will still say, I'm a CFO in the private sector, but yes, I'm available to lead, and I will serve the organization at the National Executive Committee. That means financially I'm okay to take care of myself, to do any deployment, traveling across the country. If you're deployed in KwaZulu-Natal, you're able to book yourself without being a burden to the ANC, you see, without being a burden to the state, you know. So those are some of the things that the ANC has to have, those difficult conversations with itself. And the issue of corruption, you know, I think sometimes even this issue of corruption, we tend to look at it from a point of privilege, a point of comfort. Most people over the years have joined the ANC, and they've seen the ANC as a vehicle to whether getting deployment or getting tenders. And when this corruption happens, we don't look at it in how even our economy is structured. Is our economy the way it's structured? Is it the one breeding corruption? Because when people start now to flood in an organization for money, that means that there's a crisis in the economy, because this should ordinarily be supporters or fans of the ANC. But now they've become card-carrying members, because they know when there's a job opportunity, I'll get a job. Let's leave Gauteng and look at other provinces and zoom into them.
Sure.
There are provinces where outside of the municipality, there is no other economic activities in the province. So if you are able to find a job, it's either a decent job. You become a teacher or a nurse, you can work at the local clinic, or you become a police officer, or you become a metro police. But if you look at Gauteng, people of Gauteng are spoiled for choice. They can go to private sector. There's you have like your UN here. You've got international NGOs that are here. So you have other opportunities where you can survive. So the ANC needs to actually look into the issue of the economy if it wants to deal with corruption, because some of these leaders who get elected, they have to take care of their own immediate families, extended families, and then they still have comrades who would come to them. I've got a problem, my child's school fees, or we've got a funeral at home, we don't have money for burial. So those are some of the things that also breed what we call corruption, because these people have to help these comrades, you know. So the ANC needs to stop tiptoeing around the issue of the economy, around the issue of land. They need to confront it, because it is really having a huge impact on the ANC as an organization, but also start to look at electing people who will not want deployment, but people who will just want to serve the organization and not want to take anything from the organization, but give to the organization. Because if you look at the ANC historically from the apartheid, during the apartheid, people gave themselves to the ANC. People carried the ANC, not the other way around. And we need to find, to see an ANC that its members will be able to carry the ANC and not the ANC carry them.
Well, Rebone, thank you for joining us and for sharing your insights. I think we need to get you back definitely before December, because your knowledge of the party, its structures and its workings is unsurpassed. So
I think maybe we must meet after the PGCs.
That would be
Then
good.
We'll do the
Let's do that.
breakdown of
Let's
how
do
things
that.
are to tally.
Comment down below if you want Rebone to come back on SMWX, and tag her on social media to make sure she comes back. But thanks so much for joining us on SMWX. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Aye.